It's now from Madrid, Football España editor Rury Barlow. Rury, thanks so much for your time. So, Alonso has Real 4 points currently behind Barcelona. They're second in La Liga, half a season to go. They're in the top 8 spots in the Champions League phase. So, why is he on his way?
Pleasure, Patrick. Yeah, with Alonso, it's kind of interesting because he was brought in to be the manager to modernise this Real Madrid side. He was always thought of as the system manager, someone a bit more like Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola. And the narrative that you get in Spain is always that Real Madrid results are king. You have to win these games, and that's all that matters at Barcelona, and you need to win and play well. But in this case, I do think that part of the reason that Alonso is on his way is because of the feelings, the sensations, as they say in Spain. There's just not a particularly convincing argument for Alonso to stay on as manager beyond the results. Because Jude Bellingham pointed it out earlier last week. He said that this is not a disaster just yet. We're still in all these competitions, as you pointed out too. So I think more than anything, it's the feeling that Real Madrid are not playing well and things aren't going too well that's done for Alonso ultimately.
So were there any issues in play here then, Rury, between the club's hierarchy and the head coach?
I think by the end of Alonso's tenure, whatever he was selling, Real Madrid weren't buying. I mean, if you look at it kind of across the board, Alonso's system wasn't particularly impressive. He wasn't playing the way that he'd played at Bayer Leverkusen. He wasn't doing the things that he was brought in to do. If you look at the players across the board, not many of the players that he's had have improved under him or are playing their best football. And in terms of kind of managing the dressing room as well, it's not been particularly impressive. There's been a few public spats that we'll perhaps come on to. And generally, yeah, I think the feeling is that Alonso wasn't able to do what he set out to do. And he was called into a meeting on Monday morning with Real Madrid after the Super Cup defeat to Barcelona. And I think the impression that they got was that Alonso himself didn't really believe that he could turn this around.
Well, let's talk about the dynamic then with the players. They are all important players at that massive club. What was Alonso's relationship like with the players, the superstars there? For example, with Kylian Mbappe, with Vinny Jr. as well.
Yeah, there was images of Mbappe signalling his team to not perform a guard of honour for Barcelona at the Super Cup while Alonso was telling his players to do so. And the players followed Mbappe, which was a pretty emblematic sign of things kind of going wrong with Alonso not perhaps having the authority in the dressing room that he wanted. I think he felt that he didn't quite get the backing from the club in order to have that authority over the dressing room. Vinicius, obviously, there was that well-documented spat after El Clasico, and that is kind of the genesis, the detonation point at which I think things started to go wrong for Alonso, because I think Alonso started then to try and not pander, but certainly kind of come towards his players a little bit more in terms of how they wanted to play. He compromised on his plans for the Real Madrid team. And ultimately, since then, we've not really seen a coherent Real Madrid side on the pitch, even if the relationship with the players has improved a little bit. So the inability to kind of balance those two things for Alonso has been the root cause of all of this.
Some might say pandering to the players. I think that may be a fair comment. What should the Real Madrid fans now expect from the new man at the helm? No pressure on Arbeloa, right? How will he handle it all?
Yeah, Arbeloa, the one thing working in his favour is that he has the backing of Florentino Perez, the president, who he's been very close to for some time. The two names that have been thrown out for Arbeloa as comparisons in terms of stylistically what he does on the pitch is Jurgen Klopp, a kind of high pressing style, aggressive, off the ball, direct with it, and Jose Mourinho, who was kind of regarded as his biggest influence. He's just had his first press conference in charge and kind of played down the comparisons to Mourinho. He said, if I try and be Mourinho, then I will fail spectacularly. But certainly in terms of the character, that is kind of the comparison that people are drawing. And Arbeloa, if there's one thing that I think might work in his favour, is that I think he is a very different character from Alonso. And Alonso is always known for being kind of composed, cool, collected, whereas Arbeloa is more of a fiery character. And that might help rile people up after kind of Alonso's departure.
And speaking of Alonso, Rury, there'll be plenty of suitors, I would imagine, calling for his services when the time is right. Where might be next for him, do you feel, or just too early to tell? I'll tell you what, though, there are some managerial vacancies in play right now.
Yeah, there's certainly a few beads of sweat have come across the dugouts in Europe after Alonso became available. I think for Alonso, certainly after this experience, where, as I say, he didn't feel like he had the backing from the club, he will look for a home where he is given the stability and the power to kind of take decisions himself. I think that makes Manchester City an obvious option. If Pep Guardiola were to leave, I think that would be a good landing spot for him. And the two others that he's always kind of hinted at, Liverpool primarily, I think will have the best shot at him. He's made little secret of the fact that he would like to coach Liverpool at some point. And Bayern Munich is another job that I think if that becomes available, then Alonso will see that as a suitable landing spot. But somewhere where he is given kind of full power, I think will be the question, because he was the one that everybody wanted before he went to Real Madrid.
Watch this space, Rory. Thank you so much, Rory Barlow. Appreciate it. All the best to you.